We've been there doing the regulars.
Couple of miscellaneous things that I've thrown in here. Obviously, the gazebo up on Town Square. We've started the process to get ready to do the temporary move of picking on the square down to this location. A couple of finishing touches that are going on out here in the parking lot to get us ready. The lights, the lights out here and the plugs and the things that are actually, the lights will help us in the long run, not just for picking for safety purposes and whatever. But obviously, we're going to try that this year and proceed on with seeing what we can do about making the upgrades up the gazebo, which is something y'all talked about the retreat last year. We've got some preliminary designs that we've sort of been glancing at, but basically what we got to do is I've got to come up with a figure to try and put in the budget for you this year for your consideration to see what we think we can possibly afford to do up there. Then we'll decide, we'll get some designs up there, decide what we want to do, talk to the county, maybe extend that lease because we've only got a couple of years left on that lease. We want to make sure we've got a long enough lease up there with them that it's not an issue and proceed on with that project. So that's something that's in the works that'll be coming up. And then at that point, you know, let picking on the square run its course this year down here, see how it works. I was actually pretty pleased when we had the Vietnam Veterans dedication out there that day. You don't realize really and truly how well designed it is for an event here until you actually have one here. But if we do a really good job up at the square, you may not realize how well that's designed for an event that we get in there too. So I think we need to be open-minded on where that could possibly be in the future, but that's something in the works that's coming up. Streets, I had some things in there like the upkeep and the maintenance. We need to keep our maintenance up, our mowing up. We want the town to look good. We want things taken care of. Indian Mound is a sore subject occasionally, but we need whatever it takes. Whatever I've got to delve into to make things look the way they need to look in town. Your employees are very, believe it or not, are very conscious about most of those things. They actually take it personally when folks sort of have negative comments about the way things look. So believe it or not, you may not realize it, but sometimes they take that personally, and to me that's a good thing. If your employees are taking ownership and things like that, then in the long run it makes me look good, which in turn makes you all look good, which gets us the end result. So there's a lot of little things like that we want to look at to make sure the town looks good. Mayor, you want to talk about what you and I talked about?
I just have. And I'll piggyback on what Sissy talked about the efforts that we put in our district trying to beautify it. The streets look terrible. They look terrible a lot of places. Main Street, when they came and snaked all that tar, and it just, and the Lulu Selene, bless her heart, we went to 12 years of school together. And she wears me out because those women can't even see the lines to find where to park, and they end up having trouble there. So the striping on the parking lanes are in need of something happening. And I am getting very tired of seeing even our own trucks with one and sometimes two wheels up on the sidewalk. Understanding if they didn't have at least one wheel on that sidewalk, the length of the vehicles narrows it down to a one lane coming up Main Street. And so I had a gentleman who I've known, he coached my boys in basketball. He does this kind of work, and he just gave an estimate from Patton Avenue to Harrison Avenue to the funeral home. Not repaving, we're not talking about repaving, we're talking about blackening a product with of good quality to prep at least that section. This is just for money purposes to see what we'd be looking at. And I do believe the time has come for us to strongly consider parallel parking. Mike Gruderman did an informal look and said we'd lose two places. And I don't know any different. I do know that Derek and I went out And even though a lane is only 8 feet wide, whenever it's at a 45-degree angle, it's right at 20 feet from stripe to stripe. And I understand the parallel is about 18 to 20. It's about
9 by 18.
whatever it is, it's about the same, but I just think that the vehicles are so long that it's, that's just a sign of the times, and not going to be, that's what we're at. If we're going to do any restriping at all, we're going to have to go ahead and obliterate if we change from diagonal to parallel. The timing on it, I think, is right, and the street just looks so, in my mind.
Joe, I mean, of course, when they came back and patched the street, it looks like snakes are all over it. They patched it, but it does look bad. But, and I have no problem with spraying, whatever they call that, I can't remember, but isn't that a state street?
The state, I think the state would have.
Would the state possibly help us with it, or do?
Berlin and I talked about that. Absolutely, if we can get any resources,
that's
sure.
what I'm thinking about. If
I don't see it happening, but we could ask.
Well, it surely wouldn't hurt.
And they certainly, I don't think that they would object us doing it. I don't think it'd be, would be hurting anything as far as.
I'd be afraid to guess on North Carolina.
But that's something that we certainly could.
If something happens, then they
pursue.
could say it's our fault because they didn't do it.
The one thing that you do have to realize is you can't use POW money for that, because you can't use POW money.
I wasn't anticipating POW money, but what is the board's thought about parallel parking?
I think, when we did the master plan, that was part of it. And I think it may behoove Derek to pull that plan out and look and see what, because if you did parallel parking, you could do also some more enhancements to that street.
Sure, sidewalk, crosswalks.
And see what it just to see what it involves, but I think we need to do that before we jump in. I agree that the trucks are
There's many times you have to hit your brake coming down there and go to
But
one lane.
if they can't park on the street the way it is now, how in the name of goodness are they gonna parallel park?
Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just have to go right behind the
So
store.
maybe it'd be better if we just said that you can't park a big truck on
Then we'd have to enforce it.
We don't have Fred
You know what I mean?
anymore.
Then we'd
We
have
don't
to
have
have-
Fred
I
anymore.
think this is something we really need to discuss.
Right now,
These are extended cab trucks that's got
left rear.
bumper hitches that are sticking out
Other
ready
way
to
they're
cut
gonna
to the
damage
side.
the
And they can
wheels.
parallel park in that place without any problem.
Well, those dual wheel
Yeah.
trucks, Lord.
Yeah.
But while we're talking about that, somebody talked about enforcement. We still got a lot of people that park all day on Main Street and work on Main Street.
That's
That take
true.
that
It's
park.
just no problem right now because we have plenty of demand for spaces. It used to be a problem when things were busy. Right now,
Well, I think it's gonna get a whole lot
Well,
busier.
you're all busy
I do too.
I really do. I think
I
it's gonna
think
get a
you're
lot
gonna-
busier.
What Mr. Carpenter said was a product like this was best applied in the spring or the fall because of the needs, the temperatures
Right.
and all of that. So this would, be something that we might be looking at towards the fall if we have the opportunity to go ahead and get through the budget season and look at the overall design. But I really do think that the time has come that it's just too narrow now with the big trucks. And backing out of that angle it ain't easy to do
No,
anyway.
it's not. I agree.
You
And
hold
I
your
think-
breath
I think
except when they go.
that all needs to be looked at.
Okay.
That's a sealer?
This is a sealer.
Sealer.
There's
And it
two.
does look nice when it's done. I don't know.
There's two types. There's two
Be
types.
in our parking lot.
There's two types, and
He does,
he
yes,
quoted the better one for this price. And I don't know that much.
We need that for the amount of traffic that comes through there. Parking lot sees traffic come and go, but not everything is used. On Main Street, you've got complete usage, 8 to 10 hours a day plus continuous traffic, so you'd want to use what would be the best.
Look, for now, if you talk to the state or whatever, and if we decided to do this, then we'd have to go ahead and do the park stripe it anyway. But then changing it, we can't change it, right? I don't think we need to be rushing in. I know it needs to be done.
Oh,
but
no- nobody's talking to
I don't think
rushing.
we need to rush it. I think we need to look at the time.
You sure don't wanna spray and then put lines down and then go, oh,
Change
let's
our-
change it.
yeah, let's
Spray
change
it, spray the lines out.
Yeah. and
I
you
think
need
it'd be better to get a different angle than it would the parallel park.
You mean a more
Okay.
increased angle?
Yeah,
Well, then that's gonna,
slightly.
that takes even more space.
Well,
That takes
Well,
space.
it would take up a little bit.
Or putting out the,
But it wouldn't
put out
take
those-
two.
No, it wouldn't take
They
twice
slow
as
it
much, I
down.
wouldn't think.
Like at the front, I mean, it's in that plan, if you, coming up the hill, they have those, what do you call them? They have them at Silva, and they jut out, they have them at Waynesville. And you can parallel park, but or you don't have to parallel park in Silva, they do the other too.
You know, I can see a big police presence on Main Street to help with parallel parking issues.
Well, the only thing I worry about is
been
there
a
are
while
some
since
people
I parallel
that
parked.
have never learned to parallel park, except by ear.
Yeah.
Some people never have learned.
And those people will go around back where they park in a stretch parking place.
But it's one thing for these little compact cars to park in, but when you get one of these long bed pickups, and each one of them park against the line, then they don't go in there very well either.
I mean, it's not don't let the,
Just have to
Good,
wait,
be the
everybody
enemy
have
of
to
the
wait
perfect.
about 15 minutes as I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and finally get in there.
I have to admit, the street, the way it looks right now, takes away
Oh,
from
it's
everything.
around
it
back.
just does.
It's been a while, I just had to practice.
Let's let Derek look into that and pull out that old study on that. And let's actually look and see exactly
Yeah.
what we're talking about if we end up losing 6 parking places.
Could
we
make a
may not
difference.
have to do it. But we've got to do something because
Sissy.
you can't drive through, people get so irritated, they don't even stop, they just keep going because they can't get through town.
Before we get on any further on anything else, does the board have any issues that we want to talk about that I haven't talked about? Is there anything else that, I sort of had my list and my objectives and sort of the state of Franklin, where we're at now, where we want to go. Are there any other things that you all have on your mind today that we need to talk about?
Just one question, when we were talking about going back and doing mowing, and we were talking Indian Mound and stuff like that, basically, are we going back to mowing the places that we used to mow?
My intent is if it's through there and the mower's coming through there, we're gonna mow it. And I hate to get into that legal issue of it's ours, it's theirs, it's whatever, but
The world thinks it's ours.
I want it, I want it mowed. And I've
Until it's
actually
done.
talked to Jay, and Jay actually wants it mowed. Jay actually does not like the criticism when it doesn't look nice and trimmed and neat. And he takes ownership in that, and that's fine. That's what I want, so I'm okay with that.
Well, that's all, I just
Unless you all
wanted
tell
to
me
clarify
otherwise, that's
for
what we're
myself.
gonna do.
No.
We have the personnel to do that since we have lost some off of that mowing staff from last year.
Jay and I are actually discussing that now. We've actually had to use a street person that was doing other things to be part of that mowing at the start of the season. One of those positions wasn't budgeted through in July. It was taken out, but it was budgeted partially in the last budget. We're looking at some options, maybe either doing a temporary or a seasonal type person to just do the mowing, and then that way they have X number of hours a year that they could work and mow and do a little something. But we're looking at our options, but we will adjust to that and do what we need to make that happen.
I have a whole bunch of friends that mow, and I've had several of them ask me about the town contracting some of the mowing now.
I certainly don't mind looking at that option. We may be a little late this season to want to do it. They may want a full season instead of waiting until March or April.
I never knew so many people were into mowing.
That's a sign of a poor economy.
No, I'm not talking
You know what I mean?
about
That's
your
what-
yard.
that's all they-
3 separate yards.
I'm talking about professional mowers, not recreational.
I want
mowers.
professional in my house,
You're
and I can
recreational.
pick up recreation, I don't want professional.
I've been looking at that.
Several have mentioned that it's option.
When was your last?
Yeah, I mean, it might be so
Now.
much bidding.
Or else bring and go, one or the other.
When you, with the sidewalk, sometimes the sidewalks just got grass in it. Is there any way they can?
Round up.
We've got some Roundup left over from the night.
As long as we're permitted to use it and it's environmentally friendly, I think we can.
They had to be certified or whatever.
And
Permitted.
if they'll blow off,
They'll have a license.
Well, last year, just even on Harrison Avenue there, getting down by Sunset, the grass that was growing in, on the road, in all the cracks, the grass was coming up all different places in the road where it's back, you know. And
I'll talk to Jay and see what our
Yeah.
options are.
What are we gonna do about the Indian now? I mean, you know, this is the perfect opportunity to get some ideas. It's right now, I guess weeds is the best, isn't that the best way to describe it? Which looks good in the summer, I mean, you know.
I actually made a phone call to the nursery folks that actually sold the seed and did the they had the landscaper that came in and planted the seed last year, and I'm supposed to get back in touch with him Monday. We played phone tag last week. My message to him was we probably need to just meet down there, look at it, get somebody that knows way more about maintaining landscaping than I do to see what needs to be done. And then go through the process and inform the Eastern Mountain Cherokee what we think we need to do, make sure we've got our ducks in a row and do what we need to do to make it look good.
Make sure they know what we're doing.
And that may be nothing, it may be leave it alone, don't do anything, or it may be fixing it. I don't know what the answer is, but I will follow up on that and make sure we go through the proper processes and very quickly, because we're already into the middle of April.
Right.
We're already almost past our prime to get stuff done, but I'll follow up on that and see what we can do to try and fix it. Anything else? Anybody else wants to add?
I think you hit a bunch of the topics that's been concerns for all of us. I'm
Well-
sure you've been listening to the different concerns.
Well, these things are my focus. The reason you have this list, these are either my concerns or my focus or things I think need to be dealt with. And occasionally I don't want to have my own agenda, but I can't help it in some ways, because if I see things that we need to be directed, I've got to try and get that to you so you all can make those decisions. I appreciate you all being open and honest. And again, I also take criticism and any ideas that I may have. It's okay to disagree with me. I'm not always going to agree with all of you, and that's okay. But if you'll honestly listen to me, to my opinions, and I'll honestly listen to you when you have yours, once you make those policies, I'm still going to carry them out, whatever your policy is that you want done. And I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the fact that your employees have stepped up and have really taught me a lot about this government in the period of time that I've been here. There's a lot of, this is a complicated process. People think town government might be simple, but this is a complicated process. If you follow through with it and do it correctly, do it right. I've still got a lot to learn, but if we continue on the path that we're on now, and we still do some open communication and work things out, I think we'll be very, very, very pleased.
I would like to compliment Derek for his bravery.
Oh, the old oil coal skirmish, is that what you're talking about?
Job well done.
I went by
Do you
yesterday.
carry
What a
openly, or do you have a permit?
difference. It really looks so much better already.
How long is it gonna take you down there, Derek?
We
That one-
should be done.
In that one spot?
You know, you should go by, it was,
Yeah, it's done. It took us all day Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
and how much police force?
We
Quite a
had
few.
some deputies.
Presence, yeah, police presence.
But everything should be out of there that we had cited, so.
And the one by across from the dentist, by him
Yeah,
is cleaned up too.
they're working on that.
Really?
Really?
That's amazing.
We're gonna get,
Berlin?
And that's
Across-
voluntary,
Across from his office
And that
shop.
one's voluntary, they're doing it?
that's voluntary compliance. You'll see a lot of people that before we issue a notice of violation, it's practice just to go out and say, hey, you know, we got an ordinance, we don't want to issue you a notice of violation, and here's what you need to do to come into compliance, or we're going to have to go forward. And then you see a lot of people that you tell them that, and then they'll come in your office and say, hey, what do I need to do? And they'll work with you. And you get a lot of voluntary compliance without ever having to use the notice of violation, and that's good. A lot of people just don't know, and they've never had anything enforced on them, so it's new for everybody. But once you have one out there and they issued them just a warning, and then go back with a notice of violation, and then go back with a rollback behind you, that
They realize you mean it.
starts getting real then, I guess.
See that we get a little publicity on these areas that's been cleaned up, you know, and
Sure.
Derek, I have a question for you. If that same place were decided to go ahead and get a couple more cars in there, what is the ruling on that? Do they have to be sitting there so long before they could be?
No, if they're declared a nuisance, basically we get all our statutory authority to adopt this junk car ordinance under 160A 174, which is police power. And it allows us to define and abate nuisances, and if it's classified as a nuisance vehicle, that means it is either an array of one of 10 items on that list that classifies it as a nuisance. If it's a harbor for rats, if it's a growth point of noxious vegetation, if it collects water and harbors mosquitoes, has sharp, jagged edges, all that's a nuisance vehicle. So if it had any of those characteristics, we could cite it as a violation for a nuisance vehicle. If it was a junk vehicle, it would have to be at least 5 years old, or not have a license plate, or not have a valid registration, or partially wrecked or dismantled. If it met any of those classifications, then we could classify it as a junk motor vehicle.
Okay, so they
or
can't
less
just
than
start,
$500.
collecting
No,
again?
or less than $500 in value. If it met any of those, we would classify it as junk, and then that would allow us to initiate the notice of
Yeah, I was
violation.
just curious.
well, now, if my recollection serves me, this is complaint driven at the present time. Is that right?
Yes.
Complaint driven. So, you know, if you know of somebody or that's been complaining or something that hadn't gotten back to Derek, then
I'm sure there's more places we just haven't heard
He's
about.
on Oklahoma. I don't know Oklahoma, he's on Parsons. Yeah.
he's told me many times he likes to keep busy, so
Yeah. Yeah, well,
He's-
my door's always open.
I'll have to buy a little more gas.
Yeah.
Cell phone number.
I think I can go back and contact that lady out there on the street, the speed limit.
I was trying to call.
I didn't realize it.
I have one more thing.
Okay.
And this, I'm just passing this out for you to think about before we really get down to the budget the next time. This is about the community care clinic, and I don't know if I'm new with this, thanks to Brooks.
Go ahead.
This is, the community care clinic is a clinic that right now is once a week, depending on twice a week, where people who do not have insurance, do not have insurance, cannot afford it, do not have Medicaid, do not have Medicare, do have no insurance at all, that they can come and if they qualify, they can get, they're seen by a doctor or physician's assistant, a nurse, and if there is any serious condition, they send it on to whomever. Last year, there were patient contacts, there were 1,694. And most of these are from Franklin. There are two, this is the Franklin one, and there's one in Highlands and one in Franklin. And right now, this one is with the health department. And we're trying to get it to stand on its own, for it to be its own. And I would like to see that, I know it's, with our 501(c), so you have a nonprofit, and we have X number of dollars for nonprofits, but I would like to see us to be able to really look at this, because these are our people and that we could have a separate maybe line item for this each year, that it is something that's worthy. A lot of things would have gone unnoticed. The biggest things are your diabetes is one that they caught a lot. Blood pressures, you know, this type of thing. Heart. These two things have been the two big things.
Where are they getting funded now?
All right, the funding has come from the Highlands Clinic, has given them, last year funded mostly from
The
them.
Highlands
Now,
Clinic.
the Rotary Club, the Highlands Care Clinic, community care.
That's where it first started.
And
Well, how do
that's
they
where
get
it
the money?
first started.
How do they get money?
From their people up there.
Just
Rotary
them
Club,
people up there
the
got-
town,
you
the
know, I
town,
mean,
the
where they
town,
cause
the Rotary
they
clubs. Now, the Rotary clubs here, Daybreak, I believe gave them $6,000.
A budget for them is about how much?
The budget, I didn't bring it.
Maybe it's
about-
100,000, is it?
Yeah, something like that. Mhm.
But wouldn't this come under the nonprofit fund?
We gave
Gave
them.
them.
We did last time.
That's what
This is
I'm
what we give it
saying.
higher
What I'm
standing.
saying is if we could do even more than, if we can afford it, more than just to put this as a line item. Now, I know the county this year has put it in their budget at, I think they were trying to do $50,000 a year for them.
If we put it as a line item, aren't we gonna have to put some other very worthy things as line items? How do we discriminate?
Well, that's a talking point.
That's the talking point.
He just wants
I
us
mean,
to.
I know all about it, my wife has volunteered.
But I just think it,
And
some
I
way
know-
that we could give them more than just $5,000.
You can pass it
So
around.
many things trying to get, that's something
That's
we
what
need to
I'm
look
looking
at. That's what we need to
It's
look at. We
priorities,
set an
Bob. I mean,
arbitrary-
it's just where we put our
This
priorities,
is just
right,
for
Bob?
discussion.
I know it.
No, the
But we
library
need to be
wanted that
looking-
for
Public health, though,
Yes.
public health, in my mind, might have a little higher priority than.
I've got a couple of projects I'd like to start.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, both.
I'm not sure your houses and boats and cars and trucks.
Warren, we're-
Derek, would you like?
give us a brief update. We don't do this very often, we're not running late. About the 64 West moratorium, have you figured out enough on that yet to talk to us, or you still need to look into that?
No, there's more information we need to dig up.
Okay.
Derek and Janet have been looking through some minutes and some notes and trying to come to terms of that. I actually talked to John Henning yesterday about some other issues. The question came up about the quote unquote moratorium on the old 64 sewer line out there. And Billy Merlin may know way more about this than I do. I was trying to track back down the minutes and the notes and trying to figure out why it was put in place in the first place and what the requirements were and if and when it could ever be lifted, just because I had got asked the question, didn't know the answer. And honestly, I haven't been able to find out all the information I need to know why.
I don't really, do you know why it was put in the first place?
Well, it had something to do with the pumps and stuff out of CR.
That seems to be what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and the state came through and said, you need to redo this whole thing through here. And they didn't want any more flow put on it that was actually on it then. And I guess over the years, we'd kind of looked at it and thought about it, but we also knew that it's gonna be a real expensive project to do. And then it was kind of like when the county came in and said, we're willing to rework a bunch of this stuff if, that was kind of.
Has the problem been remedied that caused the initial moratorium? That's my question.
Totally.
Not totally, because see, we didn't.
They're
we
working
didn't
on
do
it.
the- we didn't
Are they
do the-
continuing working on it? Will it be remedied at the end of August whenever the line goes hot? I'm just curious as to.
I would think so, except for tying somebody into the pressure line. Nobody, I don't think anybody will ever be allowed to tie into that force main.
But if the reason for the moratorium was a problem, and if the problem is fixed, then we need to revisit to see whether the moratorium continues to make sense. There may be other reasons to continue it. I'm not.
Well,
but,
I'm kind of leaning toward there may be reasons
Maybe.
to maintain that even if the problem is solved.
But a lot of problems were solved with the installation of the new lines, the new line out through the odors that were caused on the west end of town as far as I can sniff, have been resolved.
That's the smell
There's a
test.
big difference from driving through there than it was 5 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah, it was.
very
It was awful.
thankful. It wasn't
Yes.
only there, you know, that odor continued up that line and wrapped all the way up Palmer Drive and around Baird Cove area.
Clover
You know,
Lane, Clover Lane, did it get on Clover?
Yeah, nobody ever knew.
Panorama?
Nobody, yeah, nobody ever knew that was gonna follow that line, but it did.
Yeah.
Well,
And so, it was a terrible situation, but I don't
Sewer
think
lines
we
don't
need
stink
to.
till people shit in them, you know that?
I think that moratorium should be lifted, but I don't think we're quite ready to do that yet, because there's still reversing some flow. We're talking about it.
Still some pressure issues out there.
Just for my understanding, being the new person, I'll try and dig up a little more of that information, the technical reasons why and why not, and then that point we'll come back and we'll try and revisit that. And a moratorium sort of implies that it will be ended at a certain date. Moratorium may, if it's indeed a technical problem for some of that can't ever be fixed, then we just need to lay it on the table and say it can't be done and not call it a moratorium. But let me dig into some more facts on that, and we'll try and hash
well,
that out.
the only other thing is that when we start going over these water and sewer reviews and stuff, a lot of that's gonna mean that we're gonna have to decide where the growth is gonna be. And it may mean that we just don't want to hook anybody else because we're talking sewer now, we're not talking water.
I know what you're saying.
We got one lifted out there. I mean, you can, you know, get a variance because we're
And talking about the
take time.
ordinances, I think a lot of us have figured out that with this UDO, we're finding little pockets that we're having to go revisit because we didn't look at it with. I personally want us to start to give some attention to that from Porter Street, the old Franklin Motel property, which is now owned by the bank, west out to the park, looking at, seeing if we have the right zoning in place in that section. Right now, it's pretty restrictive. And I know the rationale was getting a buffer between the business and the community, but then we have the park and the JC, you have the Slagle Memorial in the park, and you have that bluff going over the little gap there, which is a heck of a buffer. I think that we really need to consider looking at that section of the town on the maps. We've looked at it some on the maps to see if it's just too restrictive right now for the commercial use that we need in that side of town. It's dried up on the west side tremendously, and now right now we're not allowing some uses of people who want to be able to use it for what has been time honored. And so I know we're not deciding anything today, but that is one area that I think that we're going to need to look at pretty soon.
You know, when that was done, the company that did that visited every individual piece of property in this town. And they took a look at how it's being used, you know, and that was not being used, you know, for that purpose. And so they took all that into consideration. And other places in town, people wondered why the folks up on Pauline Avenue, you know, resented that being, that area up there was put in R2 because it was totally built out. So when you look at it, why, you know, they had a reason to do it that way. But we adopted that knowing that we was gonna have to make some changes, and we have made some.
Yes, man.
And I agree with Jeff Park. It should be C2. And on the left-hand side of the road, because of a lot of vacant property out on the far end, should be zoned all the way to Womack Street.
So, in other words, we knew it'd be a work in progress.
You only have
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 houses.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a certain amount back to the road like we do from the road like we do the Carters,
Yeah,
you know?
There's just very few houses
right.
on
Yeah.
that, on that right now. They're
And they're subject
on
to
the
be
left-hand
demolished.
side. It's what, it's just,
Seaball.
Three.
Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, that
That way.
area.
But if we lose ETJ control, that's a good thing, is to pull that type of business into town. On the right-hand side, if you look at it there, you got the vacant property where the motel is. They could put them another motel, but they're limited.
Well, we don't need to limit the possibilities there. That's business
I
district.
know.
Right.
But you go on and you see, there's Ace Hardware, and then you got the empty building where the lighting center was, and you got the car lot, you got the Franklin Frozen Foods product there, and then you got the Norton property out to the park.
The tire farm.
That is a mess, and they're limited what they can do. But, you know, there's a possibility that it could clean up a lot of things if it was
Little
used
business,
for a little bit.
yeah.
But we need them, that's the growth we need.
That's exactly
We
right.
need to grow out there.
Yeah, we don't need to do anything to. How we doing, Warren?
Anything else?
I think it's been a good meeting.
Good.
Our planner might take a look at that, make some recommendations.
Yeah, that'd be a good way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
We're ready to adjourn, Bill.
This is- Since we didn't really bang the gavel started, no ain't banging the gavel again. You're on your own.
What do you think, Billy?
They said the whole house is just, it's awful.